Hello, hello. So, today Jasco has indicated they have previewed the last of the set 3 characters that we are going to see between the booster packs and the plus ultra packs and the quick packs. There are 11 in total, so yeah, let's talk about them. For this, what I'm going to do for each character, I think what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to put like a floor tier and a ceiling tier kind of idea because we don't know the rest of the set. We don't even know, for a lot of these, what the 2 character support cards are going to kind of look like. So, when you're looking at these, it's a little hard to gauge some of them without getting a full idea of what they're going to have access to. So I'm just going to kind of floor ceiling it instead of hemming and hawing and picking a middle or whatever. So yeah, first up, we have Koji Koda. So we just had this whole hullabaloo with the Asui not ban, right? The decision to ban some of her support cards instead of Asui herself. And the idea is that a character like Asui that can sort of play every attack she sees is sort of inherently dangerous. And Koda has some similar energy. A little bit more costed, right? You have to commit a foundation for each attack. But, in the grand scheme of things, at the end of the day, you could see this guy playing a 9-attack string without sweating too much. He might need a little bit more help from foundation, like check boosting or some card rating or whatever. Yeah, he can do that. So, that is inherently very powerful. It's very interesting, but it is obviously going to depend on what ally attacks he has access to, and on whatever symbol is the best at playing allies, what sorts of cards are in there to help him pass his checks. I think the mode of him usually, more often than not, is not going to be to make 8 cards not count as progressive. It's probably going to be make 3 or 4 cards not count, draw 3 or 4 cards, and then go in with the rest as sort of that's what your big turns are going to look like. So, card pool depending, I think his ceiling is pretty high. I think if we have a meta where a 627 with no defense other than like drawing an extra card or 2 back on his pokes, if that character can defend themselves pretty well, which he might be able to do on Chaos, could do on Life depending, then he has a long game strategy, right? He has a way to win long games if he can craft that hand. So if the attacks are there, I think his ceiling is probably A tier. If the cards just aren't there, if all the ally attacks that he's playing are kind of mediocre and the payoff's just not good enough, then he could be as low as C tier. I think he's really going to depend on the ally attacks in the format. Next up is Ojiro. So people are pretty excited about Ojiro. He does do an awful lot of stats. Even if all you're doing is putting +2/+2 on all your attacks for the turn, that in and of itself is still pretty good on its own. There are characters, I'm going to mention Ingenium a couple times here. But there's characters like Ingenium that give 3/3 once per turn, and Ojiro putting 2/2 on everything, or possibly 3/3 on a whole string if you really go off, is potentially very powerful. Jiro is a top tier character on the back of this sort of stat boosting, right? So people are pretty high on him. I think rightly so. I think his ceiling is almost certainly A tier. Again, no defense on the character, but he is a 6 hand size. He can take a hit. As long as you can, find useful enough pieces on his symbols to give him a little bit of longevity when he needs it, then he should be fine. It's hard to see him being much worse than B tier. He's probably always going to be capable of making top cuts with whatever the best mix of cards with him is. I know we're already looking at the Eraserhead 2 starter attacks, right? Those have a nice mix of zones, and they sort of play well with what he's trying to do. There's the one that doesn't count towards progressive, for instance. We've seen Student of the Art. So he should be getting up to that 2/2, 3/3, firing off on multiple attacks reasonably frequently, and that can't help but be pretty good. Mezzo Shoji. So on his face, this is obviously not that good, right? If you're doing +2 speed once on your turn and -2 speed once on their turn, man, you feel like your character had better be an 8 hand size, and here he is, he's a 6. Right? The best mode of him as is probably to take your once per turn +4 damage and put it on a throw or a really fast move like, a high engine kick or something. Doesn't have fire, but for example, right? You have a move that you're sneaking in, you can put +4 damage on that, and then you get a peek at some point. That's probably his best mode in and of himself. That's not even that great, but it is at least sort of something you have to respect, those big dunks coming, right? You know, maybe if you're not sure he's going to +4 damage something, you might let a setup strike hit you or something like that. So yeah, question is, his support probably gives him more counters. How much does it give him? What kind of rate does it give him? I assume it's not going to be too much more than like an average of 1 extra counter per attack or something like that. Like you could see a foundation that's just like E gonna counter, I guess. But even then, like if he's putting +2/-2 speed on every single attack, then like he's still like arguably not even B tier. Maybe he's B tier. Like maybe that's enough. But you know, when you add in the flexibility, but I think chances are, if the counters that he's gaining from his support are at all reasonable, then he's probably not going to be too much more than C. And I think if he doesn't get counters from his support, it's probably he could be as low as D, especially if just the format doesn't allow the like I'm going to put +4 damage on a dunk each turn to really even be as valuable as it has at points. That's been a pretty good ability, right? But yeah, I think he's probably CD tier. He could be high C if he gets lots of counters, right? You could see a miracle top cut run at some point, but I don't have too many high hopes for him. Rikido Sato, another guy that's sort of in the basement. This is going to be another sort of CD guy. Only C just because when you get those extra cards, that does give you some latitude to try to, like, you know, outmaneuver your opponents. You're going to find you're a little more likely to find your best foundations than an average 6-hander. You're a little more likely to find your good attack strings, but the trade-off for that is that you do basically nothing else besides you just put +2 damage on stuff, which is, you know, your worst Endeavor, your worst All Might, your worst Endeavor. You know, take your pick, right? You're getting the 1 extra card, and you're just being a worse version of lots of 6-handers. Doesn't seem like a very good trade-off to me. So I struggle to imagine anybody even running this guy. If they do, maybe he has some support that's like, if you've drawn 2 cards this turn, get this big benefit that's like enough to make him C. But he's probably the most likely like D tier entry out of this bunch. Stain, a little more interesting. So, yeah, Bree from Jasco's come out and called this guy like, oh, he's a pseudo-ran hitter, and like he kind of is. He has a lot of Ochako 1 energy, where you're gonna get 3 speed and a pool clear once per turn, and it's got a little bit of keyword dependency. The response is interesting too. It's gonna be helpful, certainly. It's not a huge game-breaking ability, but it might be pretty cool early. I do think this guy probably tops out at B tier, though. He's going to depend a lot on the weapons available, obviously, but I think at the end of the day, if you're in a top cut to long game situation, getting 3 speed on 1 attack is not really going to be enough to get you up and over. If this guy's staring down a Momo or something, he's going to give something +3 speed. She's going to give it -4 speed, block it, and his character's done for the turn. Like, yeah, he got an extra card in a pool clear, but like, there's probably not enough sustained gas there to really make him an A-tier character. But if he has some great weapons, you know, you could certainly see him making it into some top cuts. A little space here. Forgot about that. His floor, if we don't get any better weapons, I guess we've seen a bunch in the Eraserhead starter, and his floor is probably also B tier. I think it's probably hard for him to be a C tier character. He's still a 7-hander that gets a pool clear and sees an extra card. He's going to be good in some brawls. I'm just concerned about his ability to win long games, basically. 13, on the other hand, does have this sort of built-in, we might be able to steal a long game if our plan is to make something impossibly fast. You could sort of spend your game gradually picking off their speed hate pieces, and then, you know, manufacture your giant Recipro Burst. Probably the best Recipro Burst character, albeit not putting speed on it herself. You end up playing a bunch of cards that add speed to try to make this work. Certainly, there could be other cards and other symbols, or there could be stuff in this set. She could be a support card of hers that has like a giant EX on it or something. Really interesting. I don't think... So right now, the meta's not very friendly to characters that don't give stats. Like you look at the characters that are performing well, very nearly all of them are getting you some sort of stats, and if they're not doing that, they're giving you like a gigantic pool clear like a Denki or something. So, you know, she's a little behind the 8 ball, but I could see, you know, the format getting to the point. If she is just the right card pool, I could see her being A. If these symbols just straight up can't hold their own as good stuff decks, even with like the tricksiness that she's doing, she could be as low as C. She's going to be very meta and card pool dependent, I think. She certainly has potential, though. She's very interesting, for sure. Shigaraki. This is another one that's going to depend on the card pool a lot. So, the way this is constructed, what it makes you think is like, okay, if I'm on a backswing and I'm landing every attack, then I can almost do what Code is doing. Commit a foundation on each attack, get a momentum, spend that momentum, clear the pool. And that's all fine and well, but I think more likely what's going to happen is he's going to want to store some momentum in advance, spend some time poking, maybe play some throws, maybe play some other things that generate momentum. And then later on you have a turn where you have the momentum already stored. You don't need to land every single attack. You can do all the clearing you need, and probably also you're going to want to spend some of that momentum on other things because he doesn't give you any stats. So it really is going to depend a lot on what other uses for momentum he can find. Then he is going to have 2 support cards. It'll be interesting to see how those cards spend momentum for him. It very, 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 very dependent on that stuff. I think if there's like multiple attacks with like really exciting momentum cost abilities that he wants to have access to, I don't know if he gets all the way up to A tier. I think he can certainly be B tier. I guess... Yeah, I'm thinking of like the Denki 2, right? And then sort of there's value in sort of the sheer amount of momentum that you can get in some of these cases. So I could see him with like the right card pool getting all the way up to A. But, you know, again, if all he has access to are just some like EX2s and powerful 3s, and you know, he can still play a long string, but he's not giving any stats, you know, sort of like the 13 problem where you're a character that doesn't give stats in this metagame. I could see, I guess it's hard for me to I'm pretty sure the best builds of him are still going to be at least B tier. He's doing some really unique and interesting things that he'll find some value for them, I think. Toru Hagakure. This is probably the second character aside from Shoji that people have the most sort of competitive excitement for. Similar to Ojiro, similar to Eraserhead, she has this built-in scaling offense. If you're in a long game situation, she's going to be getting +3 pseudo speed to everything. And that's a pretty good way to try to work your way up and over some walls, especially if you can couple it with some encouraging training partner tricks or something like that that make use of this interaction, where she's doing this block mod stuff instead of actually modifying speed. She has a 6 hand sizer. She's going to have to find some cards. She has this response that's going to buy her some time, which is pretty cool. It's a little extra good against certain things like Fourth Kind or Setup Strike or things like that are going on Recipro, Extend. Pretty popular cards, really. There's a bunch of cards like that she sort of punishes. So she's got a lot going for her. She's going to need her deck's going to need to carry her damage. Probably going to have to find her some extra cards. These symbols have some ways to do that already. So the outlook's pretty good. Yeah, I'm still like hesitant to call a 6 hand size that's just kind of putting speed on things and has a nice defensive lead. It's a little hard for me to see it being A tier, but I'll give her some benefit of the doubt. It is hard to see this character not being good enough to top cut though, so I do think the floor is B tier. I think if sort of the good stuff model of these symbols is strong enough, and right now these are three symbols that get played in sort of a good stuff style pretty effectively right now, so we'll see how if that stays true after set 3, but you could see her winning an event, I think. Backdraft. This is the second time I'm going to mention Ingenium. For all this guy is doing, There's another character that shares at least 2 of these symbols that gives -3 speed once per turn and +3 speed and +3 damage once per turn. And he's kind of like underappreciated, I think, but I would say he's probably B tier. I think Backdraft is overall a worse version of that. He does get up to 5 damage, but it's +2 effective speed after you've taken 3 out of their card pool. You don't get to just like lob a 6 mid-7 electric jolt or anything like that. Much less flexible. The enhance is gonna net you -3 speed over time. It's a little bit better in a long attack string, but yeah, overall this guy's kind of just doing stats. He's doing them in a cool way, but he's doing them at rates that aren't quite up to snuff with what other characters are doing. So I think he probably caps out at C tier. I think what he's doing is good enough that it's hard for him to actually be D tier. So I think it's just kind of just a lock into C tier all around. You could see him come out of some sideboards if people think that this is the angle they want to use to get at Tokoyami. If something makes Tokoyami climb out of B tier, for instance. Death Arms. Another card pool dependent guy. The question with him is he going to get stuff that lets him actually play a really heavy 5-diff lineup and get away with it? You know, is there going to be, 5 diffs that clear themselves from the card pool, or are there more fake 5 diffs like Merciless Rush, Binding Cloth Capture, that sort of thing? If he gets a bunch of that kind of stuff and he can play this like 80% 5 diffs lineup that he's putting these stats on everything, that response is really, really good, and it can almost carry the character, but he still needs to be putting stats on like more than 1 attack per turn, right? So, the past would indicate that a character shaped like this can be like B plus A- tier. I don't think there's any reason to change to think that's going to be any different now, really. But he would like actively need some help. I think if the format, I think he could get up to A tier if he gets lots and lots of grease stuff to oil this plan up. But as is, if the format kind of hangs still, probably still B tier. That response is really, really good. It basically says you're guaranteed not to get turn 2'd when you're going second. Not literally guaranteed, but pretty close to it. You want to make them operate off of like at most 3 foundations. And even just looking at the symbols on him, Chaos has some 5 diffs, right? You could see him being like a heavy 5 diff Chaos deck, and he's using double jab pummel to set up the second 5 diff he's playing during the turn. I think he's almost certainly has some legs. A tier would be pretty unlikely, but the cards could come that make that happen. And lastly, we have Nezu. This is a really hard one to rate. We haven't... I don't know if we've had a pure toolbox character like this in this format. And, we do get into a fair bit of long games. He himself does not have any inherent defense. Other than going and finding the right block zone on defense, he's kind of on his own. He's going to have to pack a lot of defensive foundations in his deck just to keep himself alive. But because he's probably going to want the game to go long. He's going to want the game to go long so that he gets more activations of that swap route to get more and more value out of it, and get a big discard pile to really fill up his toolbox to find what he needs to win. He'll probably use that once per game on defense a lot to make sure he's blocking the right attack. How good could he be in the end? I'm going to say he probably peaks at B tier. One thing about him is that he does get to play cards like Blood Curdle really effectively. Any high difficulty action or asset, or even if you really want, you could play some character cards. You have buddy blocks that feed into actually meaty attacks. So it's really compelling, and it's very open-ended what you could do with this guy. I could see him sort of flash in the pan. People don't really realize what's happening. Kind of stealing an event at some point. If someone really, really works on their build. I don't know if he would keep winning once people kind of, you know, get what's going on and sort of play to the knowledge that their opponent is always going to have a perfect block, and to be like, yes, he's always going to have his best attack and things like that. But you can see enough like double draw that he can leverage. Like I said, it's really hard to rate. I'm just gonna go ahead and I'll say his ceiling is B tier. I think he will probably get out stat valued at some point if he makes it into top cuts, but I think that's also his floor. I think the best build of Nezu is probably going to be good enough to make top cuts, provided I guess the catch is that one of these three symbols has to be good enough to carry your defense pretty heavily, but one of them probably is. Those three symbols are all reasonably interesting defensively right now, so yeah, I think he's alright. I think he'll probably be pretty good. So yeah, that'll wrap it up for these 11 characters from Heroes Clash. We're going to start seeing some of that gigantic 84 card random one-off back page soon, and we'll see how that goes. Depending on the rate those come out, I might have to start doing these every like 2 or 3 days, which is fine. That'll be cool. It'll be fun. But yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if I'm way too high on one of these characters, way too low on one of these characters. I think pretty much, aside from like Shoji and Sato, they pretty much all have a chance to at least be B tier and backdraft. So it's a pretty good, like 8 out of 11 hits is pretty good, I think, overall. And you never know, you know, maybe Shoji is just getting a million duplicate arbitrage from a support or something. I would be surprised though. I'm probably most interested to see what people do with Nezu. This is just a different kind of character than what we've had. 13 is kind of too. But this is really out there. This is an old school toolbox kind of character, so that's going to be really exciting to watch. Probably, you know, I'm more interested in building like Toru and Ojiro, but I'll be excited to see like the Garretts and the Brahmas of the world build this guy and see what happens. All right, I'll see you tomorrow for a news update. Obviously, we had some big news today. We'll see if anything else follows up tomorrow, but we'll cover that next, and then probably some more previews as we head into Toronto this coming weekend. All right, see you then. Take care.